The blood on Elara Whitmore's hands had been from a mountain lion attack, not witchcraft, but the people of Boise, Idaho whispered their superstitions anyway as she walked through the settlement with her basket of herbs in 1876. She had saved the rancher's son from infection after the beast had clawed him open. But gratitude lasted only until the fever broke, and then the old fears crept back in. The way they always did when a woman knew too much about healing without a medical degree signed by men in distant cities. The sun beat down on the dirt streets as she made her way back to her cabin in the foothills. Her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, her calico dress dusty from kneeling in the wild places where the best remedies grew. And she told herself she did not need their approval or their company. She had lived alone for 3 years now, ever since her father died of pneumonia, despite everything she had tried, every tincture and poultice and prayer. Her mother had passed when Elara was only 16, leaving her with nothing but the knowledge of plants and their properties, the careful records of what grew where and when and how to prepare it. At 22, Elara had become the person people sought in desperation and avoided in health, the woman they needed but could not quite trust, and she had learned to find her worth in the work itself rather than in their fleeting appreciation. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, with a garden that most would call chaotic, but that Elara knew possessed its own careful order. Feverfew grew beside yarrow, echinacea reached toward the sun next to stands of bee balm, and in the shadier spots she cultivated golden seal and ginseng. She had just set her basket down on the porch when she heard the horse approaching, the heavy hoofbeats of a large animal carrying substantial weight. The man who emerged from the tree line was built like the mountains themselves, broad-shouldered and solid, with arms that strained the fabric of his worn shirt and hands that looked capable of breaking rocks or cradling something precious with equal ease. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves that caught the afternoon light, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were what struck her most clearly, a pale blue that seemed to see straight through pretense into truth. He sat his horse with the ease of someone who spent more time in the saddle than on the ground, and when he swung down, she noticed he moved with a grace surprising for a man who must have stood well over 6 feet tall and carried muscle enough for 2 ordinary men. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice was deep and rough like stones grinding together but not unkind. "My name is Yates Xenakis. I have been told you are the woman who knows the mountains and what grows in them." Elara straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "People say many things about me, not all of them friendly." "I heard them call you a witch in the general store," Yates said plainly. "I also heard that you saved Tom Crawford's boy when the doctor had given up on him. I do not put much stock in superstition, but I pay attention to results." She studied him carefully, noting the way he met her eyes without flinching, without the nervous darting glances that most people gave her, as though looking too long might curse them. "What do you want, Mr. Xenakis?" "I want you to teach me," he said, and the directness of it startled her into silence. "I have lived in these mountains for 8 years, trapping and hunting, trading furs and meat. I know how to survive, how to track, how to read weather in the sky and find water in dry country. But I do not know what you know. I have seen men die from infections that started small, from fevers that should not have killed them, from eating the wrong plants or drinking bad water. I want to learn what can be done about that." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Why would a mountain man care about herbs and healing? Yates was quiet for a moment, and something moved behind his eyes, some old pain that he kept leashed but not forgotten. "Because 2 winters ago my partner got his leg crushed by a falling tree." I set the bone as best I could, but infection set in. I watched him die over the course of 6 days, and there was nothing I could do except keep him warm and give him whiskey for the pain. I swore then that I would learn what could be done, so I would never be that helpless again. The raw honesty in his words cut through her practiced defenses. She had grown accustomed to people wanting things from her, needing her skills in moments of crisis, and then retreating once the danger passed. But this was different. This was a man who had faced his own powerlessness and decided to do something about it, who came not with demands but with a request, acknowledging that she possessed knowledge worth having. "Teaching takes time," she said slowly. "It is not something I can explain in an afternoon. Plants change with the seasons, and you have to know them in all their stages. You have to understand soil and sun, moisture and timing. You have to learn to see what most people miss." "I have time," Yates said. "I am not going anywhere. I built a cabin about 10 miles north of here, near the creek that runs down from the high country. I can come here, or you can come there, whatever suits you better. I can pay in meat, in furs, in labor if you need work done. I am a good student when the subject matters to me." Elara found herself wanting to say yes before she had fully considered the implications. There was something about this man that called to her, something beyond his physical presence, though she could not deny that his appearance stirred things in her that had been quiet for a long time. She had convinced herself that she was content with solitude, that she did not need companionship or partnership, but now she wondered if she had simply been protecting herself from further disappointment. "All right," she heard herself say, "but we do this properly. You come here 3 times a week, morning until afternoon. You help me with the work, the gathering, and the preparing. I will teach you what I know, but you have to be patient. Nature does not rush, and neither can we." The smile that broke across Yates's face transformed him, softening the hard edges that wilderness had carved into his features. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore. You will not regret this. Call me Elara," she said. "If we are going to be working together, we might as well skip the formalities." "Then you should call me Yates." He offered his hand, and when she took it, his palm was calloused and warm, engulfing hers completely. The contact sent a jolt through her that she had not expected, a shock of awareness that made her pulse quicken. She pulled her hand back quickly, turning toward the cabin to hide whatever her face might reveal. "Come back tomorrow morning early. We will start with the basics." He nodded, swinging back onto his horse with easy strength. "I will be here at dawn." She watched him ride away, disappearing into the trees, and only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. What had she agreed to? Teaching him was one thing, but the way her body had responded to his presence was something else entirely, something dangerous and complicated that she had no business entertaining. He was a student, nothing more, and she would be wise to remember that. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed, she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, with respect and genuine interest, seeing not a witch or an oddity but simply a person with knowledge he wanted to acquire. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. Dawn came cold and clear, with frost sparkling on the grass and her breath misting in the air as she started the fire and put coffee on to boil. She had just finished breakfast when she heard the horse again, and true to his word, Yates appeared as the sun was barely clearing the eastern peaks. He dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail, then turned to her with that same steady gaze. "Where do we start?" "With observation," Elara said, handing him a tin cup of coffee. "Come with me." She led him into the garden, pointing out each plant and asking him what he saw. At first his answers were simple, describing color and shape, but she pushed him to look deeper, to notice the texture of leaves, the pattern of growth, the way certain plants leaned toward the sun while others thrived in shadow. She showed him yarrow with its feathery foliage and flat-topped clusters of tiny white flowers, explaining how it stopped bleeding and reduced fever, how soldiers had carried it into battle for centuries. "You have to know it in all its stages," she said, crouching beside a young plant. "This is yarrow in early spring. By summer it will be flowering. In fall the leaves will be different. You have to be able to identify it always because the time of harvest matters." Yates knelt beside her, and she was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his body despite the cool morning air. He reached out carefully, touching the plant with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "How do you remember it all?" "Practice," she said. "Repetition. Paying attention. My mother taught me by making me draw each plant, write down everything about it. I still have her journals and mine as well. I will lend them to you, but only if you promise to care for them. They are all I have left of her." "I promise," he said solemnly, and she believed him. They spent the morning in the garden and the meadow beyond, with Elara pointing out dandelion and its uses, showing him how to identify plantain and explaining its properties as a poultice for wounds. Yates asked intelligent questions, making connections between things she told him, demonstrating that he was indeed paying close attention. When the sun climbed high enough to warm the air, she brought out bread and cheese and they sat on the porch, eating in companionable silence. "You live well up here," Yates observed, looking out at the view of the valley below. "Peaceful." "Most of the time," Elara said, "though peaceful and lonely are sometimes the same thing." He glanced at her and she wished she had not revealed even that much, but he only nodded. "I know what you mean. I chose the mountains because I wanted space, wanted to be away from the complications of towns and the expectations people have. But there are times when silence feels heavier than it should." "Is that why you want to learn healing?" she asked. "To have a reason to be around people again." "No," he said firmly. "I want to learn it because it matters. Because being able to help someone to save a life, that seems like knowledge worth having. But I will not lie and say that having a reason to spend time with another person who understands the mountains is not a benefit." Elara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "We should get back to work," she said, standing quickly. "I want to show you the difference between safe and poisonous plants. That is crucial knowledge." She took him into the forest, pointing out water hemlock and explaining how it could be mistaken for edible roots, showing him poison ivy and its three-leaf pattern, demonstrating the difference between elderberry, which was useful, and its toxic look-alikes. Yates absorbed everything with focused intensity, occasionally asking her to repeat information, making sure he had it right. The days fell into a pattern after that. Yates arrived at dawn on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, working alongside Elara in the garden, hiking with her into the mountains to gather what they needed, learning to prepare tinctures and salves and poultices in her cabin's small kitchen. She taught him how to dry herbs properly, how to extract their properties in alcohol or oil or water, how to combine them for greater effect. He was a quick study, remembering details and building on previous lessons with satisfying speed. But more than the learning, Elara found herself looking forward to his company. Yates had a quiet steadiness about him that she found comforting, a lack of pretense that made conversation easy. He told her about his life before the mountains, growing up on a farm in Missouri, losing his parents to cholera when he was 19, drifting west because there was nothing left to hold him. He spoke of the men he had known in the wilderness, trappers and hunters and prospectors, some good and some bad, all of them chasing something they thought they would find in the wild places. She told him about her own childhood, about her mother's gentle teaching and her father's quiet support of his wife's unconventional knowledge, about the way the town had turned cold after both parents were gone, as though without that buffer she became something to fear rather than tolerate. She told him about the loneliness of being needed but not wanted, of healing people who would not meet her eyes in the street the next day. "They are fools," Yates said bluntly when she confessed this. "Anyone who cannot see your value is not worth your concern." "Easy to say," Elara replied. "Harder to feel." "Then feel this," he said, looking at her with those clear blue eyes. "I see your value. I see your knowledge and your skill and your kindness in sharing what you know. I see a woman who is wise and capable and stronger than most men I have known. If they cannot see that, the loss is theirs." She had to look away from the intensity in his gaze, her heart beating faster. Over the weeks, her awareness of him had grown from a spark into something more persistent, a warmth that kindled whenever he was near. She noticed things about him that she had no business noticing. The way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he lifted heavy baskets, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the way his hair fell forward when he leaned over the work table, and how he absently pushed it back behind his ear. Summer arrived in full force, and with it came longer days and more variety in the plants available. Elara took Yates higher into the mountains, showing him alpine flowers and teaching him about plants that grew only at elevation. They spent entire days in the high country, and she found herself treasuring these expeditions, the way they talked about everything and nothing, the comfortable silences that fell between them as they walked. One afternoon, they were gathering arnica in a meadow filled with golden blooms when a summer storm rolled in with startling speed. Thunder cracked overhead and rain poured down in sheets, soaking them both in seconds. Yates grabbed her hand and they ran for the shelter of a rock overhang, laughing breathlessly as they huddled together out of the downpour. "So much for watching the weather," Elara gasped, pushing wet hair out of her face. "I was distracted," Yates admitted, and when she looked up at him, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Elara, I need to tell you something." "What?" she asked, though her heart already knew, already hoped. "I did not come to you just to learn about plants," he said quietly. "That was true enough at the start, but it has become something more. I come because I want to see you, because these days with you have become the center of my week, the thing I look forward to most. I think I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that." Elara stared at him, rain dripping from her clothes, her carefully built walls crumbling. "Yates, I am not sure this is wise." "Probably not," he agreed. "But I have never been good at doing the sensible thing when my heart is involved. I am not asking you to feel the same way, not demanding anything from you. I just needed to be honest. You deserve honesty." "I do feel the same way," she heard herself say, the admission pulled from somewhere deep and true. "I have been trying not to, telling myself that you are a student and this is professional and I should not complicate things. But I think about you when you are not here. I find myself waiting for the days you come. I notice everything about you, and I care more than I should about someone I have known for only a few months." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his large, calloused palm. "Then what do we do about this?" "I suppose we see where it goes," Elara whispered. And then he was kissing her, gentle at first and then deeper as she responded, her hands gripping his shoulders as the storm raged around them and the world narrowed to just this moment, just this connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "I have wanted you to," she admitted, and they both laughed, the tension breaking into something lighter and more joyful. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of rain and pine. They made their way back down the mountain holding hands, and Elara felt something shift inside her, some long locked door opening to let in light and air and possibility. After that, the nature of their time together changed. They still worked, still learned and taught, but there was tenderness woven through it now, casual touches that lingered, glances that communicated more than words. Yates began staying later, sharing dinner with her, helping her with tasks around the cabin. He fixed her roof where it had started to leak, chopped wood for her winter stores, built her a better drying rack for the herbs. In return, she taught him things beyond plants, showing him how to cook properly, how to mend his clothes with neater stitches, sharing books from her small collection and reading aloud to him in the evenings. They talked about everything, their conversations ranging from philosophy to practical matters, from childhood memories to dreams for the future. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Yates said, "Come live with me." Elara turned to look at him, surprised. "What? My cabin is larger than this one," he said. "I built it to last, thinking maybe someday I would have a family. It is yours if you want it, or we could stay here, I do not care which. I just want to be with you, Elara. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep with you and share all the days in between." "That is a serious commitment," she said carefully, though her heart was racing. "I am a serious man," Yates replied. "I do not say things I do not mean. I love you. I want to build a life with you. But I will not rush you if you need more time." Elara thought about her quiet life, her careful solitude, and realized that she did not want it anymore. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the possibility of partnership and shared purpose. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will come live with you. But on one condition. Name it. We get married properly," she said firmly. "I will not live with you as just a companion. If we are doing this, we do it right." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. "I was hoping you would say that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "I have been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to ask. Elara Whitmore, will you marry me?" She laughed, tears pricking her eyes, and held out her hand. "Yes, you impossible man. Yes, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, warm and solid and right. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, and Elara felt complete in a way she had never experienced before, as though all the scattered pieces of her life had finally aligned into a coherent whole. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Boise, with only a handful of witnesses. Elara wore a new dress of deep blue that Yates had bought for her, and he wore his best shirt and a jacket that actually fit his broad shoulders. The preacher seemed nervous about marrying the woman half the town whispered about, but Yates's steady presence and the perfectly legal nature of their union left him no room to object. After the ceremony, they rode together to Yates's cabin, Elara bringing only what she could carry on horseback, planning to return for the rest later. When they arrived, she understood what he had meant about building it to last. The cabin was solid and well made, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space, a separate bedroom, and a loft for storage. It sat in a beautiful clearing with a creek running nearby, surrounded by forest on 3 sides and open to a view of the valley on the 4th. "It is beautiful," she said honestly, dismounting and looking around. "You built all this yourself?" "Mostly," Yates said, coming to stand beside her. "My partner helped with some of it before he died. I finished the rest alone, but I never felt like it was truly home, not until now." He swept her up in his arms despite her laughing protests and carried her over the threshold, setting her down gently inside. "Welcome home, wife." "Welcome home, husband," she replied, and the words felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. That night, They consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and satisfied, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention that Yates had brought to learning about plants. Elara had been nervous, having no experience in such matters, but Yates was patient and gentle, guiding her through the discovery of pleasure until she cried out his name and clung to him as waves of sensation crashed through her. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in his bed, their bed now, and Elara felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. "I did not know it could be like this," she whispered. "Neither did I," Yates admitted, running his fingers through her unbound hair. "I have had women before, but never like this. Never someone I loved. It makes all the difference." The weeks that followed were an adjustment as they learned to share space and accommodate each other's habits. Elara set up a workshop in a corner of the main room for her herb preparation, while Yates cleared a space in the loft for storing her dried plants. She taught him to cook with more variety, introducing him to dishes her mother had made, while he showed her how to smoke meat and prepare game properly. They fell into a rhythm, rising early to work together on gathering and preparing herbs, hunting and fishing to keep their stores full, tending the large garden that Elara immediately began expanding. In the evenings, they talked and read and made love, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence, content with each other's presence. Word spread slowly through Boise that the herbalist had married the mountain man, and Elara noticed a shift in how people treated her when she came to town. Marriage seemed to make her more respectable somehow, less threatening, as though having a husband legitimized her in ways her knowledge never had. It rankled, but Yates pointed out that she could use their changed attitude to her advantage. "If they are more willing to come to you now, you can help more people," he said pragmatically. "Their reasons do not matter as much as the outcome." He was right, and as summer turned to fall, Elara found herself called upon more frequently. Women came to her for help with difficult pregnancies and monthly pains. Men sought remedies for injuries and ailments they had been suffering through. She helped where she could, with Yates often accompanying her on longer trips to distant homesteads, his presence both protection and support. They made a good team, and people began to see that. Yates's mountain knowledge combined with Elara's healing skills meant they could handle situations that neither could have managed alone. When a logging crew had an accident that left 3 men injured, they worked together through the night, Elara treating wounds and fevers while Yates used his strength to help move patients and fetch water and supplies. As autumn progressed and the aspen turned gold against the dark pines, Elara realized that she had not bled in 2 months. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain, but when the 3rd month passed and her breasts began to feel tender, she knew. She was carrying Yates's child. She told him one evening after dinner, simply and directly. "I am pregnant." He went very still, his eyes searching her face. "You are certain as I can be," she said. "My courses have stopped and there are other signs. I think the baby will come in late spring." Yates let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob or both, and then he was gathering her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the thundering of his heart. "A child," he murmured against her hair. "Our child. Elara, I never thought I would have this, a family of my own." "Are you happy about it?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Are you? Is this what you want?" "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. "I want this baby, want this life with you. I am a little frightened, but mostly I am happy." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, his hand coming to rest on her still flat belly. "I will take care of you both," he promised. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes." Winter came hard and early that year, with snow falling in thick blankets and temperatures dropping below zero. Elara was grateful for the solid cabin and the supplies they had laid in, for the warmth of Yates beside her at night and his constant attentiveness during the day. As her belly began to swell with the growing child, he took over more of the physical work, refusing to let her lift anything heavy or expose herself to the bitter cold. She chafed at the restrictions sometimes, used to her independence, but she could not deny that the pregnancy tired her more than she had expected. She spent the long winter months organizing her notes and journals, creating a comprehensive guide to the plants of the region and their uses. Yates worked on expanding the cabin, building an addition that would serve as a proper room for the child. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but the isolation did not bother them. They had each other, and that was enough. On the long dark evenings, Yates would read to her while she sewed tiny clothes for the baby, or they would simply talk, sharing stories and dreams and hopes for their growing family. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, and with it came Elara's time. The labor started in the early morning, subtle at first, then building in intensity as the day progressed. Yates, for all his steady calm in other situations, was nearly frantic with worry, but Elara talked him through it, telling him what she needed, guiding him through the process of helping her. The baby was born as the sun set, a strong, healthy boy with dark hair and surprisingly pale eyes. Elara held him while Yates dealt with the afterbirth and cleaned up, and when he finally came to sit beside her on the bed, she placed their son in his arms. "He is perfect," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Elara asked, exhausted but elated. "What about Jacob?" Yates suggested. "After my father, Jacob Xenakis." "Jacob," Elara repeated, testing the sound. "I like it. Hello, Jacob." The baby made a small sound, and they both laughed, giddy with relief and joy. Yates stayed with her through the night, dozing in the chair beside the bed, waking at every small noise the baby made. In the morning, Elara felt battered and sore but happier than she could remember being. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Jacob was a hungry baby, nursing frequently, and Elara spent much of her time feeding him and trying to catch sleep whenever she could. Yates was an attentive father, changing cloths and walking the floor with the baby when he was fussy, giving Elara breaks when she needed them. As summer returned, Elara slowly regained her strength and began working again, teaching Yates to watch Jacob while she prepared medicines and tended her garden. They took the baby with them on short expeditions into the forest, carrying him in a sling that Elara had made, teaching him the sounds of the wilderness before he could even understand words. People in Boise seemed to view Elara differently now that she was a mother, treating her with a warmth that had been absent before. She found herself making friends among the other women, sharing advice about child-rearing and remedies for common infant ailments. It was a strange sort of acceptance, based on her conforming to their expectations of motherhood rather than on her own merits, but she took it for what it was worth and moved forward. Jacob grew quickly, a sturdy boy with his father's strength and his mother's observant nature. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, exploring the cabin and the garden with fearless curiosity. Elara and Yates had to watch him constantly to keep him from eating questionable things or wandering toward the creek. "He is going to be a handful," Yates said one evening after retrieving Jacob from his third attempted escape that day. "He is your son," Elara replied with amusement. "What did you expect?" "Fair point," Yates conceded, settling Jacob on his lap. "But he has your brains, which makes him twice as dangerous." Life settled into a new rhythm, busy and full and rich with purpose. Elara continued her healing work, with Yates as her full partner now, skilled enough to handle many situations on his own. They were called upon frequently, their reputation growing as people realized that the mountain man and his wife could be trusted with their health and their secrets. When Jacob was 2, Elara discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less surprised and more prepared, knowing what to expect. The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she was not working as hard or perhaps simply because her body knew what to do now. Yates was calmer this time as well, though no less attentive. Their daughter was born in the autumn, a tiny thing with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Sarah, after Elara's mother, and Jacob was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly and bring her things. "Gentle," Elara would remind him, guiding his small hand to stroke the baby's head softly. "She is very small." "Baby," Jacob would say importantly, as though announcing a great discovery. With 2 children, the cabin felt full in the best possible way, filled with noise and laughter, and the chaos of family life. Elara had help now from some of the younger women in Boise who wanted to learn about herbs, and she found herself teaching more and more, passing on the knowledge her mother had given her. Yates continued to hunt and provide meat, but he also spent increasing amounts of time on healing work, his skill and knowledge now rivaling Elara's own. The years passed, marked by the children's growth and the changing seasons. Jacob became a serious boy who loved the forest and spent hours following his father through the woods, learning to track and hunt and identify plants. Sarah was quieter, preferring to stay close to her mother, learning to read and helping with the herb preparations. When Jacob was 7 and Sarah was 5, Elara realized she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her tired and sick for months. Yates worried constantly, but Elara assured him that some pregnancies were just like this, that it would pass. The baby, another boy they named Thomas, was born healthy despite the difficult pregnancy. But the birth took more out of Elara than the previous ones had, and it took her longer to recover. Yates insisted she rest, taking over her work and watching the children while she regained her strength. "You are not as young as you were with Jacob," he said gently when she protested. "Your body needs time." "I am only 30, she countered. "That is not ancient." "No, but 3 children and years of hard work take their toll," he replied. "Let me take care of you for once." She did, reluctantly at first and then with growing appreciation as she realized how good it felt to be cared for. Yates proved himself more than capable, managing the household and the children, and his healing work with steady competence. Jacob helped with his younger siblings, and even Sarah pitched in, entertaining baby Thomas while their mother rested. By the time Thomas was walking, Elara felt like herself again, strong and capable and ready to return to full work. But something had shifted in her perspective. She no longer felt the need to prove herself constantly, no longer carried the weight of other people's opinions the way she once had. She had built a good life, a family that loved her, a community that valued her contributions. That was enough. The children grew, each developing their own interests and skills. Jacob became an excellent tracker and hunter like his father, but he also had a gift for healing, possessing an intuitive sense for what people needed. Sarah loved books and learning, and Elara taught her to read and write fluently, encouraging her curiosity about the world. Thomas was the adventurer, fearless and bold, always climbing things he should not and getting into mischief. When Jacob turned 15, he announced that he wanted to go to medical school, to become a real doctor who combined traditional medicine with the knowledge his parents had taught him. Elara and Yates discussed it at length, knowing it would mean sending him away, but ultimately they supported his dream. They had saved money from their healing work, and Yates's trapping still brought in income. They could afford to send him east for education. The day Jacob left for Denver to begin his studies was one of the hardest of Elara's life. She held her tall son, who had grown to match his father's height and build, and tried not to cry as she told him to be safe and write often. "I will make you proud," he promised. "I will learn everything I can and come back to help people here." "You already make us proud," Yates said gruffly, gripping his son's shoulder. "You are a good man, Jacob. Do not let anyone tell you different." With Jacob gone, the cabin felt emptier, but Sarah and Thomas filled the space with their own noise and energy. Sarah, at 13, was beginning to show interest in boys, which made Yates grumpy and protective. Thomas, at 10, was finally becoming old enough to be genuinely helpful rather than just enthusiastically chaotic. Letters from Jacob arrived regularly, full of enthusiasm about his studies and frustration with professors who dismissed traditional healing methods. Elara wrote back with encouragement and advice, telling him to stay true to what he knew while remaining open to new knowledge. 2 years after Jacob left, Sarah announced that she wanted to be a teacher, to open a school in Boise where children could learn properly. She had been helping teach the younger children in town for years, discovering that she had both the patience and the skill for it. Elara and Yates supported this dream as well, helping her make plans and connections. Thomas, when asked about his future, just grinned and said he wanted to explore the whole West, see everything there was to see. Elara suspected he would do exactly that, her wild child who could not be contained. When Elara was 42 and Yates was 45, Jacob returned from medical school with a degree and a wife, a sensible young woman named Margaret who was training to be a nurse. They planned to set up a practice in Boise, combining modern medicine with traditional healing, exactly as Jacob had always envisioned. The whole family gathered for a celebration, and Elara looked around at the people she loved, at the life she had built from nothing but knowledge and determination, and the love of a good man. She thought about the woman she had been at 22, lonely and convinced she would always be alone, and she could hardly believe how much had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "How lucky I am," she said honestly. "How blessed. I never imagined I could have all this." "Neither did I," he admitted, "but I am grateful for it every single day. For you, for our children, for the life we have made together." Sarah established her school the following year, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic to children whose parents could not afford to send them away for education. Thomas, true to his nature, left at 16 to see the world, promising to write and visit but making no commitments about when he would settle down. Elara worried but tried to let him go, knowing he needed to find his own path. Jacob's practice thrived, with people coming from miles around to see the doctor who combined the best of both worlds, modern techniques and traditional remedies. He and Margaret had a daughter, making Elara and Yates grandparents, and the joy of holding that tiny baby brought tears to Elara's eyes. As the years continued to pass, Elara and Yates settled into a quieter life. They still worked, still healed and helped, but they had trained others to carry on the work, to spread the knowledge. Jacob had taken over most of the medical emergencies, while Sarah incorporated healing knowledge into her teaching. Even Thomas sent letters from his travels describing plants and remedies he encountered in different regions. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates took Elara back to the meadow where they had kissed in the rain, where everything had truly begun. It was summer again, the same season, though they were both older now, marked by time and experience. 20 years, Elara said, looking out at the golden flowers. It has gone so quickly. And yet it feels like you have always been part of my life, Yates replied. I can barely remember what it was like before you. Lonely, Elara said. It was lonely for both of us. Yes, he agreed. But not anymore. Never again. He pulled her close, and she leaned into his solid warmth, this man who had seen her as wise when others called her a witch, who had asked her to teach him and then stayed to love her. They had built something rare and precious, a partnership based on respect and affection and shared purpose. I love you, she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. I love you too, he replied. Always. The sun was setting as they made their way back to the cabin, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Elara thought about all the sunsets she had watched alone, and all the ones she had watched with Yates beside her, and she knew which one she would choose every single time. They arrived home to find Jacob and Margaret there with little Emma, and Sarah visiting with her latest beau, a serious young man who worked at the general store. The cabin was full of life and love and laughter, exactly as it should be. That night, lying in bed with Yates's arms around her, Elara thought about the path that had brought her here. From the lonely herbalist living on the edge of town, whispered about and feared, to this full life surrounded by family and purpose. It had started with one man choosing to see her differently, choosing to value what she knew rather than fear it. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? Yates asked sleepily. For seeing me, she said. For asking me to teach you, for staying. Thank you for saying yes, he replied, kissing her temple. For trusting me, for building this life with me. They fell asleep together as they had done for 20 years, and Elara's last conscious thought was of gratitude for every moment, every choice, every step that had led her to this perfect present. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Thomas eventually returned from his wandering and settled near Boise, opening a trading post that connected mountain communities with supplies and goods. He married a rancher's daughter and had 3 wild sons who reminded Elara of him at that age. Sarah married her serious young man and had 2 daughters who attended her school and showed every sign of becoming teachers themselves. Jacob and Margaret had 2 more children, a son and another daughter, and Jacob became the most respected doctor in the region, known for his skill and his kindness. Elara and Yates became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family, with grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren filling their home during holidays and celebrations. They aged together, their hair going gray, their bodies slowing, but their love remaining constant. When Elara was 63, she fell ill with pneumonia, the same disease that had taken her father. Despite Jacob's best efforts and every remedy they knew, her lungs filled with fluid and breathing became difficult. She knew, with the clarity that comes from a lifetime of healing, that this was likely the end. Yates stayed by her bedside, holding her hand, his face drawn with grief but his presence steady as it had always been. "Do not leave me," he said, his voice breaking. "I am not ready." "I do not think we ever are," Elara whispered, each word an effort. "But we have had such a good life, my love, so many years together, more than I ever dreamed possible." "It is not enough," he said fiercely. "It will never be enough." "Then remember this," she said, squeezing his hand with what strength she had left. "Remember that I loved you from the moment you asked me to teach you. Remember that you gave me everything I needed, everything I never knew to want. Remember that I was happy." Tears ran down his weathered face, but he nodded. "I will remember. I promise I will remember." Their children gathered, Jacob and Sarah and Thomas, along with spouses and grandchildren, filling the room with love and sorrow. Elara looked at each of them, seeing the lives she and Yates had created, the legacy they would leave behind. "Take care of each other," she told them. "Keep the knowledge alive. Help people. That is what matters." As the sun set on another day, Elara felt the tightness in her chest ease, felt herself drifting. She looked at Yates one last time, memorizing his face, the love shining through his grief. "Thank you," she breathed, "for everything." And then she was gone, slipping away as gently as a breath, her hand still held in Yates's. The grief that followed her death was profound, touching everyone who had known her. Yates was lost without her, wandering the cabin like a ghost, unable to settle or find peace. His children worried about him, but Jacob understood that some losses cannot be healed, only endured. 3 months after Elara passed, Yates went into the mountains, following the trails they had walked together so many times. He climbed to the high meadow where they had kissed in the rain, where he had first admitted he loved her. He sat among the golden flowers, looking out at the view they had shared. That was where Jacob found him the next morning, sitting peacefully with his back against a tree, looking as though he had simply fallen asleep. But there was no breath in him, no heartbeat. He had followed Elara, unable to bear being without her. They buried them together on a hillside near their cabin, under the pine trees with a view of the valley. The headstone reads simply, "Elara and Yates Xenakis, beloved healers, devoted partners, together always." But their true legacy was not in stone. It was in Jacob's practice, where modern medicine and traditional healing worked in harmony. It was in Sarah's school, where children learned to read and think and question. It was in Thomas's trading post, which connected communities and shared knowledge. It was in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward. It was in the people of Boise who no longer whispered about witches, but spoke instead of the wise woman who had healed them and the mountain man who had loved her. It was in the apprentices Jacob trained, teaching them to combine respect for traditional knowledge with openness to new ideas. It was in the gardens people planted with healing herbs, remembering what Elara had taught them about the power of plants. Years later, when Jacob was an old man himself, he would tell his grandchildren about his mother and father, about the herbalist people had feared and the mountain man who had seen her wisdom. He told them about love that transformed lives, about partnership built on respect, about the importance of knowledge and kindness and courage. "Your grandmother was called a witch," he would say, "but she was the wisest, kindest, most capable person I ever knew. And your grandfather loved her for exactly who she was. They built something beautiful together, something that lasted long after they were gone. That is what real love does. It creates something bigger than two people, something that echoes through generations." The children would listen, wide-eyed, and then run off to play. But the stories stayed with them, shaping how they saw the world, how they valued knowledge and kindness, how they understood that love was not just feeling but action, not just words but choices made every day. And in that way, Elara and Yates lived on, their love story becoming legend, their legacy growing with each passing year. The herbalist and the mountain man, who had found each other in the wilderness and built a life that mattered, who had loved fully and lived well and left the world better than they found it, in the end, that was all anyone could ask for, and more than most achieved. They had their happily ever after, not just in the years they spent together, but in the ripples their love created, spreading outward in ever-widening circles, touching lives they would never know, creating good that would never end. Their story was one of transformation and growth, of two lonely people finding completion in each other, of knowledge shared and love given freely. It was a story of the Wild West, of Idaho mountains and hard-won survival, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart and its capacity for connection. And though they were gone, their cabin remained standing for many years, maintained by their descendants as a reminder of where it all began. People would visit sometimes, standing in the clearing where Yates had first asked Elara to teach him, where she had said yes and changed both their lives forever. The garden still grew, tended by loving hands, the same plants Elara had cultivated blooming year after year. The creek still ran clear and cold, providing water as it always had. The mountains stood eternal, witnessing the passing of generations while remaining fundamentally unchanged, but the people changed. The people grew and learned and carried forward the lessons of those who came before. And in that continuation, in that forward motion, Elara and Yates truly achieved immortality, not of the body but of the spirit, not of fame but of impact. Their love story had a happy ending not because nothing bad ever happened, but because they faced everything together, supported each other through difficulties, celebrated joys as one. They built something that lasted beyond death, a family and a legacy and a love that time could not diminish. When the last of their great-great-grandchildren was an old woman herself, she made a pilgrimage to the hillside where they were buried. She brought flowers from the garden, descendants of the plants Elara had grown, and placed them on the grave. "Thank you," she whispered to ancestors she had never met but whose influence had shaped her entire life. "Thank you for loving each other. Thank you for building something that mattered. Thank you for showing us how it should be done." The wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying the scent of wildflowers and mountain air, and for just a moment she could almost feel them there, the herbalist and the mountain man, together as they had always been, as they would always be. And that was how the story ended, and how it continued, and how it would always live on in the hearts of those who understood that true love is not just about two people finding each other, but about what they build together and what they leave behind. Elara and Yates had built well, and their love story would be told and retold for as long as there were people to remember that wisdom and strength, combined with love and partnership, could create something truly extraordinary. The herbalist they had called a witch had been wise indeed, and the mountain man who had recognized that wisdom had been blessed beyond measure. Together they had proven that love transforms everything it touches, that knowledge shared multiplies rather than diminishes, and that two people committed to each other, and to something greater than themselves, can change the world in ways both large and small. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their legacy secure. And in the mountains of Idaho, where their love had bloomed and flourished and borne fruit that fed generations, the wind still carried whispers of their names, the plants still grew with healing power, and the lessons they taught still resonated in the lives they had touched. Elara and Yates Xenakis, the herbalist and the mountain man, had lived and loved and left their mark on the world. Their happily ever after was not just the years they spent together, wonderful as those were, but the eternal impact of their partnership, the ongoing gift of their example, the continuing ripples of their love spreading outward through time and space, touching lives and healing hearts long after they had gone. And that, truly, was the best ending any love story could have.